Thank you so much. What a wonderful way to bring us into the time of worship together. Come into the circle of love and justice. Come into this community of mercy, holiness, and health. Come and you shall know peace and joy. I light the chalice today with the words of Marjorie Montgomery. Life is a gift for which we are grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and mysteries of this great gift. Our opening hymn this morning, Wake Now My Senses, is number 298 in our gray hymnal. We're doing both the gray hymnal and the teal hymnal today. Who says we're not diverse, right? And so if you could stand as you're able, and we'll have our opening music. Well, now's the time for our offering. Our social action recipient this month is the Women's Health Center. And I was just reminded of our mission in our music, and I hadn't noticed it before we sang it, but I just wanted to remind you of verse number 4. Wake now, my conscience, with justice thy guide. Join with all people whose rights are denied. Take not for granted a privileged place. God's love embraces the whole human race. A little bit of our universalist half of our Unitarian Universalist heritage in there. Someone on the front lines, literally. Now, as Tom passes the basket, we're going to hear from another one of our congregations, one of our more fun songs. Now let us sing. We'll hear a video from that. Give us a chance to see what somebody else is doing in their church.
Faith within. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Sing to the power of the faith within.
Bay Area congregation. I don't know which bay it is, though. My guess is San Francisco, but there's probably more than one. But thank you for that. Well, I brought a poem today. It's one of my favorite things to do. I don't know. And it has nothing to do with the sermon. So it's just what's going on. And it's tough because I say all the time that in our worship hour, we don't do partisan politics. We don't name names. We don't get into politics. But this is a poem. It's one of my all-time favorite poems. It's not one that you can say you like. It's not, I say it's not, nobody ever likes Schindler's List, right? You just appreciate it, right? It's powerful, right? This is a powerful poem, and I'm pretty sure I've read it, but since I've been coming for 10 years, I wrote down the sermons I gave you, but not all the poems I necessarily gave you, but we could use a reminder. It's called Kindness by Naomi Nye. American-born poet of Palestinian parents who raised initially in St. Louis, then lived in Palestine for a number of years, now lives in New Mexico, and you're going to hear that influence in this poetry as well. And there's no way to transition from this to my topic. All right. So what I'm going to do is read this poem for you and then just sit down for a few seconds and put a little pause, have a little reflection, and then continue with the theme for today, which is really kind of built around Valentine's Day theme kind of thing. And in reading this, I'm going to add 3 words of my own. The first three words are mine, and then the rest is Naomi Nye's. Dear Mr. President, before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment, like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand when you counted and carefully saved. All this must go, so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking the bus will never stop, the passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you. How he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to mail letters and purchase bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, it is I you have been looking for, and then goes with you everywhere, like a shadow or a friend. Isn't that a powerful poem? Well, if you like poetry, this is your day. I'll begin with another, just a verse. I prize thy love more than whole mines of gold, or all the riches that the East doth hold. My love is such that rivers cannot quench, nor aught but love from thee give recompense. Despite their reputation as prudes, which is very much undeserved, this beautiful expression of passionate love was written by a Puritan. In fact, it was Anne Bradstreet of the Massachusetts Bay Colony of the 17th century. I have more to say about the Puritans later. Some of the most erotic literature ever written was produced in the name of religion. And I'm going to give you some samples in a few moments. And it may come as a surprise to you because many of us associate religion with the suppression of all things enjoyable. And there's some truth to that. But it's not quite that simple. My intention today is to sort out some of the different responses of sexuality to sexuality among the world's religions. Aim of showing you how very affirming of healthy sexuality that religion can be. So let's start with a universal human approach to this. We all agree, I suspect, that part of what it means to be mature, responsible adult is the ability to exercise some level of self-discipline over our impulses, such as food and sex. But the difference between food and sex, though, is that no one simply thinks the craving for food is a sin. Most religions are ambivalent about sex. It's true that much of the religious world aims to suppress natural sexuality, But every religion has elements within them that affirm and promote healthy sexuality. The Hebrew scriptures that are sacred to Jews, Christians, Muslims declare nudity, masturbation, non-procreative sex as sinful. For Christians, Jesus equated lust in the heart with adultery. But the Hebrew scriptures contain the Song of Solomon, which contains passionate sexuality. That book begins with this ode from a young woman. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is more delightful than wine. Pleasing is the fragrance of your perfumes. Your name is like perfume poured out. In the tradition of Islam, the Sufis affirm sexuality in poetry, song, and dance. This is from Rumi, who's probably, I bet a lot of you would say it's one of your favorite poets, right, Rumi? My heart is on fire. In my madness, I roam the desert. The flames of my passion devour the wind and the sky. My cries of longing, my waves of sorrow are tormenting my soul. You wait patiently, looking into my intoxicated eyes. You accept my passion, the serenity of love. You are the master of existence. One day I shall be a lover like you. Hinduism and Buddhism have the same ambivalence towards sexuality. In those traditions, followers are encouraged to accept everything that makes them human while striving towards the ultimate goal of transcending those very things. If you feel anger, then be angry. But it is a measure of spiritual growth first to be able to let go of that anger, and even more so not to feel it in the first place. And it's the same with sex. The Buddha has written that the activity of sex will never satisfy the desire for sex. See some nodding heads. Such desires, whether they're for food, sex, fame, or fortune, are the kinds of attachments that cause suffering from which one seeks release by following the Eightfold Path. When you think of Hinduism and sex, the Kama Sutra, usually it's the first thing that comes to mind. Say more about that in a moment. Kama is one of the 4 objectives of humankind. It refers to sensual pleasures, but not just sex. A good meal, beautiful music, appreciation of art are all expressions of kama. Anything about which you can be passionate can be kama. Right? Another objective is artha, meaning material wealth. Hindus have no problem affirming the acquisition of wealth through hard and worthy work. And then there comes dharma, roughly translated as duty or the law of God or righteousness. Like the poet who wrote Ecclesiastes, Hindus believe there is a time for everything, a time for fun and pleasure, a time for hard work, and a time to provide for one's well-being, and a time to devote oneself in the service of others. Then over one's lifetime and then many lifetimes, the ultimate goal is to achieve that final objective, moksha, or liberation from all earthly desires, including sex, and to be released from the cycle of life and death. Now, I mentioned the Kama Sutra. Sutra just means book, so Kama Sutra is the book of pleasure. It was written as a marriage manual sometime between the 1st and 6th centuries of the Common Era. It includes very detailed descriptions on all aspects of sexuality, which I will not read from the pulpit. I thought I heard an amen there. I'm not sure, but okay. All right. It's online. What I will read, though, right, is the relationship of kama, this duty, passion, joy, including sexual pleasure, and then the other objectives. Now, this language is not gender neutral. There are clear distinctions among the duties of men and women that we would not affirm. But the text affirms healthy sexuality for both men and women, and surprisingly for its time, heterosexuals and homosexuals. Man should practice dharma, artha, and kama at different times and in such manner that they may harmonize together and not clash in any way. He should acquire learning in his childhood. In his youth and middle age, he should attend to artha and kama. And in his old age, he should perform dharma and thus seek to gain moksha, release from further transmigration. It's from the Kama Sutra. There's a time and a place, just like Ecclesiastes. So we see here that ambivalence seen in other traditions, right? Sexual desire is regarded as natural and healthy, and among the worldly desires that ultimately be transcended. Okay, so now let's talk about our tradition, Unitarian Universalism. And we'll start with those Puritan ancestors with whom I began the sermon, because we are direct descendants of the Puritans. The Puritans created the Congregational Church in 1648, and the Unitarians were branched from the Congregationalists, broke away from the Congregationalists in the early part of the 19th century. So we're direct descendants of the Puritans. And for some reason, they're very much associated with sexual repression. And as I said, it's not unfair, although we're probably more familiar with this quote from Henry Mencken. Puritanism is the haunting fear that somewhere someone may be happy. Yeah, haunting fear. In fact, the Puritans share the same ambivalence as everyone else, and in some ways they advanced a more modern liberal approach to sexuality. For much of this section, I want to just give you one citation. Richard Godbeer's work, Sexual Revolution in Early America, written in 2002. And this had just come out when I was in seminary from 01 to 04. So it came out while I was in seminary. And this is why you pay ministers, because you don't have to read this book. You pay us to go to seminary and study this dense stuff. I don't know this guy's story. My guess is he was either working on his PhD or he had just gotten it and he had to publish or perish. And so I need something academic that no one else would really read. And so he wrote this thing. Now, there are some highlights that I can give you to spare you from having to read this book. All right. He does say, when it came to sexual relations, Puritans were both exuberantly permissive and vehemently restrictive. Yep, both of them. Like other Christian traditions, Puritans embraced the biblical images of Christ as a bridegroom to justify sex within marriage as an expression of godly devotion. Sex was not limited to procreation. It was okay, even encouraged, to have sex for pleasure, provided such pleasure was not the ultimate purpose of the act, but rather as a means of spiritual connectedness. And they don't just mean God, they mean between the partners. This actually is a good thing. Okay. We'd probably agree with that analysis. As one English minister put it in a marriage manual popular in its day, sex was a duty, but, quoting, must be performed with goodwill and delight, willingly, readily, and cheerfully. He called it due benevolence. Due benevolence. Now, you've heard of due diligence, right? A duty you owe, right? This is the pleasure you owe. Due benevolence. Okay. And they mean sex. All right. So, if you're ever in mixed company, you want to suggest to your partner, you've got better things to do. You might say, dear, don't we have some benevolent duties to attend to? You'll be the only ones, unless you're at a party of this crowd, you'll be the only ones who know what that means. And you'll be able to get away. And we'll leave it there. All right. Where the Puritans might be considered progressive for their times were their insistence that this duty was mutual. Men had just as much responsibility for pleasing their partners as women. According to Godbeer, bear with me, it's a long paragraph. So essential was sex to the Puritans' notion of a healthy marriage that refusal to engage in relations with one's spouse could lead to disciplinary hearing at the local church or judicial prosecution. James Matlock, a cooper, was excommunicated by the Boston congregation in 1640 for having, among other things, internal quote, denied conjugal fellowship unto his wife for the space of 2 years together. John Williams of Plymouth Colony was summoned to court in 1665 to answer for, and again, an internal quote, abusive carriages toward his wife in special sequestration of himself from the marriage bed, refusing to perform marriage duties towards her according to the law of God and man. Okay. Yes. In fact, impotence, but not infertility, were grounds for divorce. And Goodbeer cites examples from public records of women who sued for divorce for that very reason. Think if they'd had social media in those days, right? All right, let's jump ahead a few hundred years to Unitarian Universalism today. As you might guess, for a faith movement that resists any form of creed, we have no formal code of sexual conduct. I humbly suggest that our principles set a higher standard than any code might ever require. Just look at the principles that we hold together. Permit me to offer this brief aside. Human sexuality is a wonderful gift. It includes our orientation and identity. One thing our commitment to the full inclusion of our LGBTQ plus siblings ought to show is that it's not a given that sex outside of marriage is unhealthy or that sex inside of marriage is. Regardless of orientation, what makes sex wonderful and beautiful and spiritual is not the degree to which one conforms to some code, but rather the degree to which we apply in our intimate relationships the principles to which we aspire in all parts of our lives. To treat each person, including our own bodies, with dignity and respect, honoring relationships with equity, justice, compassion, and so on. Many of you are familiar with the OWL program. That's an acronym for Our Whole Lives. I did not ask ahead of time. Have you ever done an OWL program here? Okay, so you're familiar with it. I won't go backwards on that. If you're not, we could talk about that after the service. It's a comprehensive sexuality education program with age-appropriate lessons for children through adulthood, created in partnership with the United Church of Christ. Okay. They list at least 7 criteria for a healthy sexual relationships. Now, this is out of the unit for grades 10 through 12, so high school level. They have a K1 and then 2, well, whatever. They've got the whole range. But this is high school, and I would say above. All right. Here are the criteria. Consensual, non-exploitive, mutually pleasurable, safe, developmentally appropriate, based on mutual expectations and caring, and respectful. Okay. That's a pretty good list. So if you're dating somebody or supporting someone in a relationship that's trying to determine whether to go to that level or not, that's a good checklist for any age, high school and above, yeah, for the appropriate. Now I'm going to expand on a couple of those items from that list. Notice that word mutual is used twice for emphasis. We can attribute our Puritan ancestors for that emphasis, I suppose. An important issue is whether the people involved are in the same relationship. Somebody's in a casual relationship and someone else is in the deeply committed relationship, right? Whether they're on the, as we'd say today, on the same page. I humbly suggest that it is very difficult to do so in casual relationships because by definition, they lack the mutuality of understanding that comes from growing a relationship from that first impulse of attraction into a committed relationship and partnership. The second qualification I would add involves a more mature understanding of what it means to give consent. Consent must be informed, voluntary, and mutual. When sexual partners are not open and honest about themselves, their partners cannot give informed consent. So I leave it to you to decide when, for example, embellishing your online dating profile crosses a line, but at some point it actually deprives the person of giving consent. It's a form of sexual assault. And in fact, that's against the law in some more progressive states. I didn't check Maryland, but we'll see. Likewise, if there is an unequal balance of power in the relationship, it may mean that the consent is not voluntary. Such an imbalance exists whenever one partner has some form of authority over another. That's why every professional code of ethics prohibits members from having sex with those they are serving, with their clients. It applies to ministers and congregants, teachers and students, also doctors, lawyers, every professional. In those types of relationships, I humbly suggest that there is no such thing as voluntary consent unless and until that power relationship changes. Now, this is not in the text, but I'll just tell you a quick aside. I was at a gathering of ministers down at the Mountain, one of our retreat centers northwest of Atlanta. And we had a minister, and it's like, you can't be dating members of your congregation, right? And he said, and this was not part of the formal program, we're just sitting around. And he said, but I don't know whether I'm dating this person or not. We go to Starbucks and we have a cup of coffee. Is that a date? And so we're peppering him with questions like, well, what were the expectations? And, was there any physical contact? And, those kinds of stuff. And we spent an hour trying to figure out where this line was that he can't cross. And the way it's supposed to work is if you do find yourself of the minister, remember, I think more than half of our ministers are women. So this is not patriarchal here. But I think the rule is, or the practice is, if you want to enter into a relationship, because in many places, like where I served in Montgomery, the only people you would date are in your congregation. That's not literally true. Because the temples, the two Jewish, that we had a temple and a synagogue, always good friends with the Jews, and then the Lutheran Church of America, Presbyterian, PCUSA. We could probably find some compatible folks there, but in Montgomery, Alabama, it was a small pool, and so they're saying, how can I have a social life if I can't have a social life within the congregation? And the expectation is that if you want to explore a relationship, one of you has to go. And usually it's not the minister, because that's the minister's job. They're called, they serve the whole congregation. And so what they're saying is the congregant needs to leave the congregation for a while you're exploring that relationship. Now, in a place like Montgomery, the nearest one is an hour away, or an hour and a half away, depending on which way, so it presents some real life problems of people who care about these rules and are trying to implement them and be honest and open about them. So, but as you might guess, being UUs, we don't have like, it's written in black and white, and there's no, we just work hard at trying to do the right thing. And we try not to judge each other when we make that call and we're a little bit off. Although the last several ministers who were removed from the UU ministry, it is possible to be removed from the UU ministry, not for heresy, right? We always say it doesn't matter what you preach from the pulpit, but don't move the candlesticks. Don't interfere with the culture of the congregation and that kind of thing. But it was for misconduct. And usually sexual misconduct, using that power, taking advantage of someone who might be vulnerable, counseling someone going through a divorce, and then having an affair with that person. That'll do it. You can get kicked out of the ministry for doing that. Okay. So by extension, back to this, that power relationship, the partner who feels entitled to sex because, for example, that partner is a breadwinner is exercising a form of power that precludes the other person's consent from being voluntary. That needs a little more explanation too. With or without a marriage license, I would regard sex in those circumstances as unhealthy and inappropriate. It's not to say that couples can't have a traditional view of a relationship. Doesn't mean that if they're in a relationship where, and I'm just going to indulge pronouns so I don't have to do it like 3 different times. If the husband's out working away outside the home and the woman is home and rearing children in that traditional model, and they agree to that and it's mutual, that's fine, right? We're not condemning that. And I think sometimes we do that by implication. And we got to watch that. Just pointing that out. But it is to say, if that's the only reason that a woman is consenting to have sex with her husband, that's not voluntary. That's not voluntary. Okay. It's not enough that people enter into such relationships voluntarily. Just each and every sex act has to be informed, voluntary, and mutual. Those are the standards that we collectively put out there. Again, we're non-creedal. We don't judge people. We try not to judge people, but we're people. We do, but we try not to. But those are the kinds of things that we talk about in our principles and purposes that might help guide us. Unfortunately, it doesn't come down to some, we don't have a catechism that says, well, just don't have sex and you won't have this problem. We're not there. We do embrace healthy sexuality, and we don't, again, insist that it be within or without a marriage license sanctioned by the state. It's got to meet these spiritual principles of caring for people, of respect, including your own body. And that's what we teach. That's what we preach, right? Not codes. So I prefer to end this sermon discussing sex that is both healthy and appropriate. So let me turn to your homework. As I said earlier, some of the most erotic literature was written in religious or spiritual context. I've noted some of it: the poetry of Anne Bradstreet, Rumi, Song of Solomon. To be honest, the Kama Sutra does read like a textbook. I would not recommend it for this particular exercise. But your assignment is to read one of these sources to your partner or to yourself. And then if the Spirit moves you to engage in due benevolence like bunnies. Of course, whatever you do, I admonish you, as our earlier English minister would have you do, to engage in such behavior with good will and delight, willingly, readily, and cheerfully. May it always be so. Blessed be. Okay. And so sometimes, and then we also have that problem of, well, we're not going to judge people for whatever two consenting adults want to do. And I hope you got out of this. It's spiritually, it's more complex to that. If you're trying to be in a community to enrich your spiritual well-being in your overall life, you don't just say whatever makes you happy, just do that. Because, we also say, people have the misperception, whatever you want to believe here, you can do that. And that's just not true. It's just not true. But what makes us different, I think, is in our acceptance of each other and in that encouragement to spiritual growth and to truth. And we recognize that we don't always get that right. And that's okay, right? You could be, in the Baptist church, for example, Baptists accept divorce. They don't call it, there's a lot of divorced Baptists out there. But I don't think you could be a minister, and I don't think you'd be invited to lead the worship service, and you think about all the people who come and lead these services. We don't even know what they think about whatever they're telling us, right? We don't know what their lives are, and we don't ask. And I think that's generally a good thing. So we've got to challenge ourselves, right? Are we accepting of traditional values, right? Are we so determined to go forward and to liberate? Are we just like here to liberate everybody from what we perceive to be the bondage of patriarchy, that we don't take into account what people want to do in their lives and their agency over their lives? And in our desire to be free, are we willing to say, you know, there's some boundaries that we can say that's wrong to do that? That's wrong. And I think we could, you know, that's where I think there's a fair self-critique that we could ask ourselves as Unitarian Universalists, right? But having said that, it is important to say that healthy sexuality is not something we do outside of our religion. It is part of our faith. Healthy sexuality, that it's okay to love who you are and to be who you are and to be with the one you love. That's okay. This is not something like we look askance at that or we just don't pay it. No, we embrace that. We embrace healthy sexuality. We affirm that. And that's an important message. And that's the one I wanted to give you for our Valentine's Day. On another occasion, maybe take a look at that critique, right? That is a fair critique, but not for Valentine's Day, not for the month of February, right? Not while we're wearing our red, right? Okay. So let's not forget that there's another message out there. But today, you know, let's just affirm good, healthy sexuality and recognize that it's not outside our religion. It is part of our religion, our faith, our heritage and tradition to affirm healthy sexuality. Okay. So apropos of this theme, I chose when the Spirit says do. Now, when the Spirit says do, you can think of do whatever or whomever, whatever you want. But it's in our teal hymnal, but we'll have the words up front. If you like to look at the music, it's in the teal hymnal at 1024. That'll be our final hymn. Don't forget to, and then stand for our hymn if you can, if you want to, and then remain standing for the closing words. Then don't forget to have a little snack and grab some soup. And then we're going to gather, hopefully not too long after that, for our program on James Reeb and take it from there. All right. Thank you.
So, how many verses?
Religion like sunshine that goes everywhere. It's temple, all space. It's shrine, the good heart. It's creed, all truth. It's ritual works of love, and it's profession of faith, divine living. Let's go in peace, everyone.